One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Okay, so let's get started then. So the plan for today, we are going to paint this very cool Orc Sniper from Reaper Miniatures. This is the Bones version. He's available as a pewter model as well. This is sculpted by Trey Manor, who has his own company, Redbox Games, but back in the day he used to sculpt some very cool figures for Reaper. So I guess this is going to be our Orctober miniature. So my plan is we're going to give him sort of a dark green skin tone. We're going to give him a wolf fur vest and boot fur over top. So we'll paint all of the various things in leather. And then there's also the bow. We're going to paint this as a horn bow. So we'll start with like a bone color, and then we'll do some shading to make it look a bit more like horn. And he is also on one of Miniature Monthly's cool bases with the magnet preloaded inside the 3D printed base. So this is the plan for today. We're going to make a green skin and make him look cool. Lots of leather today. I decided that we're going to do the chainmail in a somewhat non-metallic metal style, which doesn't really mean anything complicated. It just means that I'm going to highlight the chainmail using non-metallic paints instead of using metallic paints. There's really not a lot of metallic components on this model. The chainmail, which shows on the sleeves and on his the chain shirt, sticks out a bit under the fur, and then there's a little bit of metal on the studs and on his dagger. So we'll just do that with our usual midnight blue, twilight blue, snow shadow will be our NMM steel triad. That's a really good triad for doing that from Reaper. Okay, we'll use a bit of black to darken it as well, and we'll make it a bit lighter in spots with some white. So that's our armor color. We're going to do, the skin is going to be leaf green, and we're going to highlight it with rot stump mud, which I just found this. I don't know where this paint came from. I found it on my desk. I think it was from ReaperCon a couple of years ago or something, or maybe a Kickstarter. And I don't know why, but it just grabbed my attention. It's an interesting green. It's more of an olive green, and it's got quite a lot of yellow in it. So I think that might be an interesting looking color to highlight over this leaf green and give him a bit more of a... So he'll look dark green, but have an olive green highlight to his skin tone. And to make the shadows on him look really, really dark, I'm going to be mixing Reaper's deep red into the leaf green to create my shadow color, which is going to be a very dark brown, leaf green mid-tone, highlighting with some rot stump mud. If you don't have rot stump mud, there's a lot of other colors that look very similar to this. Pale olive, camo green. There's half a dozen Reaper greens that are of this sort of same interesting olive and lighter warm green color. And then to create the further highlights, I think I will be using, I want them to be a bit more yellowy than usual today. I was going to go creamy ivory. Maybe I'll use golden blonde. Yeah, let's use golden blonde today for our highlight. So I'll probably use golden blonde and then also creamy ivory to create my highlights in most of my colors today. So there, that's our skin. Deep red, leaf green, and rot stump mud. And so that's for armor and skin. The wolf skin is going to be Reaper's Wolf Gray 9434. You can pretty much make this gray yourself by mixing any black and white with just a touch of blue in it. It's a slightly colder gray color, and then we'll create highlights in that with the golden blonde again, and we need to create some shadows in that, so we'll use let's use, sounds like there's some color in that. Let's use some Brion Blue 9055. I'll try to use that as a shadow color with the wolf color. That's what it looks like there. Now hopefully that won't be too close. You know what, that will be too close to the armor color. So here's what we'll do instead. Let's use a brown instead of the blue. Let's use, I'll just use a bit of black and brown. We'll mix black and brown into that to get a shadow color on the fur. Doesn't really look like wolf fur there then, but it'll differentiate it a bit from our armor. So that's our fur color. And then we're gonna have a whole bunch of different leathers on this thing. He's got like leather belts, leather boots, leather bracers, leather straps, leather quiver, leather pouch. There's all kinds of different leather. So I'm gonna use, I think I'll probably use russet brown, which is the Harvest Brown's triad for some of the leather. So that's 9199 9200, and I think ruddy leather was the other color that I wanted to use, which is somewhere here on my desk. I use that one quite a lot. Ruddy leather, where are you, ruddy leather? There it is. Ruddy leather, and maybe leather brown. Okay, so we're gonna mix it up quite a bit with our leathers to get a bunch of different colors, and then we'll see where that takes us. And probably I will use some inks at the end. I don't know, I'm definitely gonna use some inks at the end to make some interesting color varieties on the different leathers. And I'm gonna use transparent burnt sienna and transparent burnt umber. So you can do this project without these colors, but with these colors at the end, in the final stages, I'll show you how I glaze these over the leathers to give the leather a little bit more shiny look, and to change the tint and change the color of the leather a little bit. So that's the plan. And I don't know, I had some plan for yellow, but I don't remember what it is. So I've got yellow on my table as well. I don't remember what I wanted the yellow for now. So we might use leather, or might use yellow, or we might not. We'll see. That's the plan. Is it a good plan? I don't know. We'll find out in a minute. Okay, so what I'm going to use for brushes today is going to be these three, I think. I've got, these are basically just slightly different sizes of Kolinsky Sable brushes. I'll do most of the work with this great big one, a size 4, and I'll do my base coating, most of my, probably most of the detail work with it as well. That's the advantage of having a really nice tip on a sable brush. You can do textures, you can do details, you can do whatever you want with it. And then I've really been enjoying this size 2. This is just a house brand from a Dutch company, I think. And I've got a new Rosemary & Co. 00 that I've been using a little bit, trying to get broken in. And I might use this if I need to do some dark lining, something like that. Okay, so this is my brushes for today. All right, and I'll leave it like that. Some more room. Ah, there's the orange brown I was looking for. So orange brown is quite often useful for highlighting leather. So I'll keep that one on hand as well. Okay, I'm going to put my eyeballs on and let's kick off. So I'm going to start by putting a base coat on all the armor. So that'll be nice and dry, because I'm probably going to do a dark wash on that later. So I'm going to start by putting midnight blue in the palette. Don't need very much of this. This is not, like the amount of armor that's on the model is relatively small. And sometimes that's not dark enough as a color, so I'll put a little bit of black there as well. Twilight blue, snow shadow, get those all loaded up. Again, we don't need a huge amount of this because it's not a huge amount of armor on the model. And while I'm doing this, I'll just mention to everybody that if you are hanging out with us on the Discord, you are welcome to ask questions. I might have the sound turned off, so I might not hear if you ask a question, but type your questions in the chat and I'll see them. And if you are on the Twitch stream and you have a question, you're also welcome to ask questions. I just might not see it in the chat quite as easily. But if you look, there's a link in the chat on the Twitch stream that'll take you over to the Discord if you want to ask a question there. And I haven't seen your question come up on the Twitch chat. Okay. All right. As well, if you're, there we go, now the paint's flowing. If you're painting along and you want to get some feedback as we go, you're welcome to snap a photo with your phone, drop it into the chat room on the Discord. You can't do that on Twitch, but on the Discord you can. And then, we'll periodically pause and chat with people about how their work is going. And we cut those bits out of the videos that go onto YouTube, so your stuff doesn't end up on YouTube unless you want it to. Okay? And I love painting. I'll quite happily paint all day. But what I tend to do is if nobody's talking to me, I tend to make things more and more complicated. And the aim behind this is to give something which is accessible for beginners. So if you have questions, ask me questions. I'll slow down and I'll keep it at a beginner level. Nobody asks questions, I will start to do things that are more advanced. Some people like that, some people don't. So don't hesitate to chat with me. All right, so I'm grabbing the Twilight Blue. I did put just a little bit of, Midnight Blue, a little bit of black in there to darken it up. And we're going to put that as the base coat on the armor first. Yeah, I see somebody's just commented that they're working on an orc, but they're working on a different one, the guy with the sword and the shield. Also a very cool figure. There's a whole series of them that Trey Manor sculpted are very cool. Alright, so this is covering the chainmail. And I'm just going to, I start in the front, I'm going to work my way around. Now I didn't thin this with water. These paints are already quite thin to start with. But what I don't want to do is put on paint so thick that it fills in the chain links and fills them up solid. Because if I want to put a dark wash over the chainmail at the end, then I don't want the little spaces to be filled in with solid paint. So we'll just work our way around from kind of going clockwise around the model, painting in the chainmail. Right around under his knee there. So there's that, we went all the way around under there. That's good. And then on his shoulders, or his upper arms, the chainmail sticks out a little bit under his gray, what's going to be the wolf cloak, the wolf coat, the wolf fur. So we want to make sure we fill these in with that blue-gray as well. There we go. And we'll keep going around to the front. And we'll do that on his left arm as well. Now, at the front, on the left, there's a bit of the chainmail shows under his armpit. So you make sure you don't miss that little bit. I love the way these are sculpted. They've got really cool textures and details sculpted into the armor, sculpted into the fur. It's really well done. Really like them. We could also paint all these spikes at this time. Don't have to. We're gonna do the bracers as leather with metal spikes, and we can paint the spikes at the end, or you can give them a bit of a coat paint now. I will probably end up painting over the spikes by mistake because I tend to be pretty messy. If you feel like you want to be neat, then you can paint the spikes now and not worry about it. I've painted the spikes, but I will probably mess them up. So, just it's the nature of the beast. Oh, okay, cool. We got a few people watching on the Twitch side of things as well. Okay, so that's the base coat on the armor done. Now, it's super humid here right now. Things are taking 5-10 minutes to dry sometimes right now in the studio. So that was one of the reasons I wanted to get this painted. Like, you can see where I started was this little bit in here, and this is all still wet on the figure. So things are taking quite a bit of time to dry. That's the reason I wanted to do that bit first. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the leather, and I'm going to grab that ruddy leather color, and I want to do a first coat on some of the larger pieces of leather. So I'm going to do all the leather colors across the bottom of my palette. It's going to be my armor. My fur is probably going to be in this corner. Let's make that plan. The fur is going to be in this corner. I'll do the skin tones across the middle, and then I'm going to do all the weird leather colors across the bottom. And we will start with ruddy leather right there in the corner. And we'll work that way. Now this color I want to have for this sort of leather skirt thing that he's wearing, which is underneath his chainmail. Now I'm going to be kind of careful not to get this onto the chainmail, but if you do, it's not the end of the world. It's just going to make it look a little bit like it's rusty. Now, a little bit of his skin shows through on the kneecap, but this leather actually goes over top of the boot as well. There's like a flap of it that covers the fur right in here, and that's what I'm going to paint that this color as well. And as we move along, then there's a patch of fur. This is a patch of fur. And then this is going to be leather again. And work our way along. I just realized I broke one of my rules, and not really a rule, more like a guideline, which is to define the light direction right at the start of working on the model. So I'm just going to finish doing this little bit of leather, and then we'll talk about what my intended light direction is on the figure. So there's that bit of leather there. There we go. Now my overall plan for light is that the light is basically coming straight towards the center of his forehead from the front. So something like this. And what we're going to do then is we'll give him a nice highlighted face. We'll focus the highlight in the center of the body, the top of this arm, the top of the bow. So the light's coming in this direction, basically like, there's my light arrow. It's coming in like that. Okay. Give him a nice bright face and a spotlight on his face. Okay. Now there's a lot of leather on this guy. So I'm going to get a second leather color right away. Let's grab the russet brown this time, a slightly different color, less red, more kind of, I don't know, it's almost like really dark orange. Oh, and I forgot I'd run out of this color. Do I have enough left to get through this session, I wonder? Let's see. I know it's in the mail. So, actually maybe I'll check my magic box of paint supplies. Aha! Yay! Brand new pack of autumn browns. There we go. I'm very excited. It means I get to open this new pack of. Now, here's just a tip for you. I always keep a hobby knife on my table in case I find something on the Mini that like a mold line that I need to remove or whatever. But I always keep a cap on that. And why is it so important to have a cap on that? It's not for my personal safety. It's because you go and you do a thing, and then you tend to put the knife down when you're done. And a few times, because there's brushes laying all over that, there's probably, well, let's see, there's 25 different paintbrushes just laid all over the table in a mess. And if I chuck that down in the pile with the cap not on it, I've accidentally damaged the bristles on expensive brushes before. So good to have the hobby knife there so you can always remove your mold lines, but I always keep a cap on it in case I do something stupid and wreck a nice brush. And what are the chances I would do something and wreck a nice brush, do you figure? They're pretty good. I've ruined Raphael 8402s by putting the tip of them into wet super glue. I've done that twice. So, yes, always, in my opinion, worth being a little bit safer about that. There we go, brand new paints. It's like Christmas. And in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that harvest brown and orange brown. I'll put them in the beginner paint kit. So when we do beginner classes, we have a giant box of paints. So once the paints, I don't throw away the ones that seem to be empty. I throw them in the beginner paint box and let the beginners shake the paint, and then nothing comes out. Let them experience that moment of suffering. No, we just, because there's always paint left in the bottle. You never really empty the bottle. And then we show people how to open the bottles, get the paint out with a brush, all that kind of good stuff. So we have a continuously growing selection of paint in the beginner paint pile. There we go. So brand new russet brown. So I'm going to give it a good shake because quite often what happens, you get those brand new paints and the first drop that's going to come out is going to be basically clear medium. Well, that's looking pretty good. That's looking pretty, yeah, that's looking really solid. Probably that's because it's the one that was upside down in the package sitting on the shelf. All right. We just have to remember that those other two probably are going to come out of the tube clear. Now, this color I'm going to use for his boots. And I think for... I know I'm going to use it on his boots, so let's get that part done anyway. Why am I doing the boots now? Because I want to be able to see where the fur is, where the fur ends, a little bit more easily. So I load up my brush, get the point on it, and I'm going to paint those boots a dark color. It's dark leather color. Now, it may not look much different on camera, but these two leather colors are actually quite different. So one's more red, one's more sort of orange. And he's got a lot of leather on him by the time we're done, so that helps makes him look a little bit more different. Make him look a little bit more different. I don't know. I don't know if that's good grammar or good explanation or what, but that's the general idea. We want a lot of variety. Visual interest, let's call it. Okay, so we've got this dark brown color on his boots now. This dark first coat of paint. Now, the next thing I want to do is I'm going to paint the first coat of paint on the fur. And as previously discussed, we're going to use black and brown mixed with wolf gray as the base coat of the wolf fur, the fur that he's wearing. So So there's my black and brown, there's some wolf gray. And what I'm going to do is, so basically, I'm going to start all dark colors and then work my way up towards lighter colors. And that way, so essentially you can think about this color as being the shadow color of the leather. And then I'll put lighter colors on it to cover most of it. So I'll be adding the midtones, and then I'll do final details with the highlight color. So that's why instead of just painting a coat of wolf gray, I'm going to start with my shadow color of wolf gray. So this is going to be a very dark version of that wolf color. And it's quite a different character from the other two browns that are here, which were the ones for the leathers. It's almost like a blue gray rather than or a blue brown than like the red brown or the orangey brown. And I'm going to paint this all over anywhere that there's fur. So that's going to be on the boots, and it's going to be on this sort of fur vest that he's wearing. Now, we could dry brush this because it's got a really well sculpted texture. But I think what would tend to happen if we do that is we're likely to hit things with that dry brush color that we don't really want to hit with that. So we're going to paint the fur by lightly painting it with the lighter color. So it just means gentle brush strokes, light pressure, but not really dry brushing the way you might think of it. And that's going to let us be more precise with where we have the color end up. So this color goes right down into all the shadows. If you're finding that the paint is not going down into the crevices in the fur texture, you just kind of wiggle the brush a bit, work the brush, spread out the paint more thinly. You don't have to like actually thin it, you just spread it more thinly while the edge of it is wet. And then it'll work its way down into those low spots. And what we'll do is after this coat is dry, we'll come back and take a look. And I will probably do a black wash over this fur at the same time as I do a black wash over the armor. So if you think about the sequencing of how we're going to paint that on the model, the black wash on the armor is one of the last steps on the armor, but the black wash on the fur is one of the early steps. So what we're going to do is after this color is dry, it means we're going to leave painting the fur almost to the end. And after I do that wash, I'll probably take a break, take questions for a few minutes, because it's going to take a few minutes for that wash to dry. So I want to do all those washes kind of at the same time to let them have a chance to dry. Or we might have an opportunity to do a bit more leather texture or something when that time comes. So I'm painting the fur on this vest that he's wearing. And then we'll paint the fur on the boots, as well as the fur under the bracer on his left forearm. So the fur vest, boots, and left forearm all get this dark kind of blue-brown, blue-gray color. Okay, so that's the shirt, and now we're going to do the fur under his arms, sorry, under the leather bracer. And I don't have to be particularly careful here, because we're going to do the skin tone afterwards, And then we're going to come back and do leather straps and all that sort of thing. But don't really want to get this on the chainmail, so just watch for where the bits of chainmail are and try not to get that too messy. Okay, there's the arm. And now let's do the boot. And I just realized I missed a bit of... Did I miss a bit of leather, or is that a mold line? I'm going to pretend that I missed a bit of leather. And we're going to make that mold line. I don't know if that's a mold line or what that is. That's interesting. This blue-gray, as it's drying, is actually a lot closer in color to the russet brown than I was expecting. And we're going to have to find another way to make it look different later on. That's not a problem, just something to be aware of. Okay. So there's all my fur. And I'm going to go back and paint that scrap of leather that I missed the first time through, which is right there by his knee, his left knee. I missed a little bit of fur there, of leather there. You could read that either as leather or as fur. I'm saying that it's leather, but you could decide it's either one. Okay, and I think I'm going to paint the brace or the leather strip on his right arm. I'm going to paint that ruddy leather as well. Get that done now. I can hear people saying, but Geoff, you're about to paint a red shadow in his skin. Won't that disappear? And it probably will. And that's okay, but we're going to make it look different by giving a little bit of a texture. We'll use dark lining to separate the materials, and we will also highlight them differently, and we will put some inks on the different colored inks on different sections of leather at the end. Now, am I good to go? No, I missed a bit of chainmail. Missed some chainmail in there. Between the belt pouch and the bow, there's a little section of chainmail in there. So I'm going to get that now as well. There we go. Okay. Are we on the right track now? Feels pretty good. Okay, so let's get ready to do some skin tone. Now, so we've got armor, leathers, fur, so we're going to put the skin tone down here. And the one thing I've left out, you probably have realized by now, is I didn't pick a color for the bone of the bow, but we'll do that. I'll just make a weird bone color from whatever's on the palette when we get to that point. So I need a little daub of red, and we're going to put a daub of the leaf green on there. And we're going to put some rock stump green. And we need some golden blonde. 9033 golden blonde. Great color. It's one of those colors that everybody should have on their table all the time. Makes great highlight colors. And I'm going to have a little bit of creamy ivory. I'm just going to check the creamy ivory over there in the corner, in case I need it. Okay, so there's our skin color. So what I'm going to do, as I said, I'm going to take some of the leaf green, move it off to the side here, and I'm going to mix in a dollop of deep red. And that's going to give me this weird looking brown color. It's this one right here. And it's actually strangely close to some of the other browns that we're using. So I'm going to put a little bit more green in that. There we go. That's the kind of color I want right there. Definitely more green than brown, but it's quite dark and desaturated. I like that. So that's my base color for my skin tone. Okay. Let's go back to the other view. There we go. So we're going to put this on all of the skin. So where do we have skin? First thing we do is the knee, because that knee has just been, keep thinking about the knee that's got to be green. There it is. Now the knee is green. We'll do the hand here, and we'll work our way around systematically, making sure we get all of it. So we're doing the left hand. Just nicely coat that. Now, I said something about the light color, or the light direction, being like this, but I haven't really said anything else about that. That's because at this stage, the colors we're putting on are all shadow colors. Okay, these are all shadow colors. And we are going to cover these with the midtones and the highlights. And just a little bit of these shadow colors will still show once we cover them up. So these are like the foundation of our pyramid of highlight colors. Okay, so we're putting the shadows on right now. And I'm going to do that so that everything, when I do the mid-tone, I'll place those as highlights facing towards the light source. And because I'm doing all of the mid-tones in the same way at the same time, except for the fur is going to be at the end, the light will be consistent across the model because I'm doing all those mid-tones pointing towards the light at the same time. So we're doing all the shadows first. It's the general idea for today. And we'll highlight towards the light source. Make sure we get under that elbow. Okay, so there's the left arm, the right arm, the knee. Doesn't have a lot of skin showing. His nose, torso, skin showing. Or does he? I feel like this zone in here should be chainmail in there. But it could also be skin. So let's make it skin. So you can see some pretty clear chain links there that end. So under that must be skin. But then a little bit further over, there's a few more chain links that show. So there must be skin showing right under his right armpit. So make that skin colored. And then we're going to paint the face. So we'll start down around his neck. Get his jowly chin. Folds of skin on his neck. This guy reminds me a lot of one of the orcs from the Lord of the Rings movies, from the Two Towers. There's really beat up looking veteran orcs from Mordor that are at the siege of Minas Tirith. So I guess that must be the Return of the King that's in. They're all like really, like they're all half burnt and they've all got battle scars, and so this guy really reminds me of those guys. Did we get everything? I feel like we did. Okay, so we need to give that a few moments to dry. So while we're waiting for that to dry, we're going to start working on the armor. Now, so we already did a very dark color on the armor. The next thing we're going to do is a much lighter color. I'm going to grab that twilight blue. Now what's going to happen? This twilight blue tends to be quite a thin color. So if I just put that, like slap it on over the chainmail, it's going to fill all the holes in. So I've got to be very, very light with that. So one approach might be I could make another color. Let's grab some midnight blue and add some snow shadow into it. Snow shadow is a thicker color. So these two colors look similar. These two look similar. This one is very runny. This one is much thicker. So if you're finding that this thin color is flowing into the recesses, well, you can make your own and thicken it up and then paint with that one instead. But really your own, you get the same result at the end of the day. It's just with the one that is runnier, you have to be a lot more lighter with your brush strokes. So now we need to start thinking about our light direction. So our light is coming this way, which means that the center point of these highlights, I want them pointed generally in the direction of my light source. So let's start on this shoulder here. We're going to put this blue, this lighter blue, over top of the areas that are already painted and make a highlight pointing towards the light source. And I'm just going to brush that on gently. Don't completely cover it over. I'm going to leave some dark in this corner. I'm not sure how clear you can see that on the screen. Let's try that just a little bit. It's always the same with this camera. It doesn't handle the dark colors very well. There we go. So I'm leaving this area darker. I'm painting the parts of the miniature towards the light, like up here on the shoulder, this lighter color. Anywhere that I've got that sort of raised convex surface is where I'm going to put this lighter color. Not much paint on the brush. So on this skirting bit, there's a bit there. There's a sort of a raised convex shape there. And there's another one there. If you're not sure exactly where those shapes are, look at the leather. There's one there, one there, one there. Those shapes in the leather are very, very obvious. So use those to guide you as to where those shapes should be in the chainmail as well. A little bit over the back hip there. And there's our knees. We'll do that over the top of the knee as well. Now this doesn't point directly towards the light, but it is convex, so it's going to catch the light a little bit. There we go. Work our way around to the front. So this is our first layer of highlight, but it's also going to be the shadow of the next layer. So the next layer is going to cover most of this color. Okay, so don't worry if it's not perfect. It's creating the initial shape of our highlight and giving us a good foundation for the next color, which is to come. Now on this arm with the light coming this way, the center of the highlight is going to be about there. Right about there on the, I don't know if you can see that, right there is where our highlight will be. There we go. And work our way around. Did we get all of the armor? I think we did. I'm ignoring the spikes. It's all right. So now we take our color and we're going to make a lighter shade of it, or tint, I suppose it would be technically, by mixing a big dollop of snow shadow into that. And then we're going to do the same colors again. So we're going to do 50-50 twilight blue and snow shadow, then snow shadow with some pure white in it. And that'll be our highest highlight. So we get 3 more layers of this to go. There we go. I'm going to go back to all those same spaces, and we're going to make these highlights smaller than the previous ones, but always remember where your arrow is, generally pointing in the direction of the arrow. Now, anybody who's done much in the way of NMM painting, non-metallic metal painting, will know that the exact position of the reflection is not directly towards the light source. It depends on the observation point of the person, or the perspective of the person looking at the model. But to keep it simple, where NMM is not our main focus on this model, we're just going to simplify that to say that our highlight is going to be, generally speaking, pointing towards the light source. So now on this part of the arm, right, I want the highlight to be about there. So I'm going to start a little bit away from that, and my brush strokes are very light. I'm not really trying to pick out individual chain links. but my brush strokes are light enough that I really only hit the tops of the chain links with the brush. And we keep doing that until we build up the color just on the raised surfaces pointing towards our light source. And this is good practice for when we do the fur in the same way. Same thing on his right arm. We want that highlight fairly high up because our light source is this way. So that highlight needs to be sort of generally pointing in that direction. There we go. Now we'll do the highlights on the back. So our light now is coming from the opposite side. I'll get a little bit on the knee down there. Now these areas of chainmail are sort of out of where the light will hit them directly, so we don't need a lot of highlighting on there. So these highlights should only cover maybe 20% of what we did previously. So these are like the final highlights on these parts of the chainmail in the shadow side of the model. This is as light as these are going to get. And right now they look like highlights. But when we do the much lighter highlights on the other part of the chainmail, they're going to look like shadows. So now we go straight to snow shadow. Get some nice smooth snow shadow worked onto the brush. Don't need a lot of paint for this. We're going to do a very light touch, and we're going to build up just a few little highlights. So we'll start in and around this knee. Our light is this way, so that's the direction of our highlight. Just lightly. And this highlight has to be inside the previous highlight. Otherwise it doesn't look like a highlight. So like this one on his leg, okay? The highlight should have some of that shadow color bracketing it around both sides. And I'll aim just to get this on the chain shapes, okay? Do that up here on his chest as well, just a few little dots under the armpit. And then there's our main highlight up here on the top. Like that. So I've decided where these highlights are going to be at this stage to make sure that the chainmail kind of looks like chainmail. And I'm also going to line up the highlights in the skin with these highlights. And that's going to help reinforce that illusion to make it look like slightly shinier armor. Okay? A little bit more on this side. Now there's some spots where this bones figure, the sculpting is like not the sculpt, but the cast is a little bit soft, so the details are sort of becoming invisible. And what we'll do is, that's why we're going to do the black wash over it, to make sure those details we bring the contrast back and make sure the details get reinforced. All right, and now we want 50-50 mix of pure white and snow shadow. This is our highest highlight color for our armor, and we don't need much paint on the brush for this, and we want this to be very, very light. So I'm going to start down here on the kneecap, very light touch, and if you really feel comfortable with it, you can even just deliberately choose to highlight just a few little links. Okay, and that's not bad practice, because after we do the black wash, these are going to dull down and look less shiny. And we're going to come back in and do a few more little highlights on that to make sure it still looks shiny. Now the chain links under his arms, just pick out one or two of those. The top of his arm, same idea, just very, very lightly pick out the armor. This is where the sculptor has done a good job for us, but the bones manufacturing process kind of softens those details a little bit. That's just, it's the way life goes, you know. I want a few extra ones up on the top of that shoulder, I think. Just feel like that needs a highlight. I don't know, so my instincts are saying, I don't know if it's right or wrong, but that's what we're doing. There we go. So now we've got that shiny-ish looking armor. I do feel like it needs to be done again on this, on the arm. Sometimes you do one coat of a color and it's just not quite. Now that looks shiny now. That's what we wanted. So we're going to do it again on the knee. And we'll do it again up here on his chest. Just a few dots. And then on the top of that shoulder, we'll really pick that out. There we go. And if you've ever taken NMM classes with Aaron Lovejoy, he calls that reinforcing or insisting on the color. Insisting on the color. Okay, so now we've got some nice bright highlights, and that's going to guide where we're going to put the highlights on the skin. And the next thing we're going to do is going to be the skin tone. So we've got that dark color in the skin. We're going to now go straight to leaf green. And leaf green is really our mid-tone, if you will, for the skin tone. So now we're going to be quite careful to make sure we get the skin tone in the right places. Anywhere that we start highlighting the skin, we want to highlight it towards the light. So if you look at my arm, the light is directly above, so we get a nice big highlight pointed at the light source. This color in here, that's the color we've already put on. That's the dark green we've already done. Now you can see there's quite a straight, strong line. And now we're going to start putting on this highlight color. And we're going to put another big highlight of a lighter color in the middle. So our mid-tone is going to end up being kind of a strip along like that. But for now, we're painting it over all the surfaces that are eventually going to be lighter. So we're going to start with that green kneecap that's sticking out down there. Way down there. Give a little green dot on the knee. Painting that kneecap is probably the most difficult part of this model. Yeah, it probably is. Next, we're going to do the hand. Now, on the hand, it's got all these very cool details painted. So what we want to do is we're going to leave shadow in there. And we're going to work towards these ridges that he's got sculpted. So I'll start in the shadow, bring my paint forward, but I don't want to paint all the way up to the bracer. I'm going to leave a dark line of skin tone along the bracer. And I'm going to paint his forefinger here, but not right up to the bow. And then I'm going to bring it forward up to the bottom of the shadow of that sculpted bit. And then I'm going to leave a little bit of shadow and paint the top of that sculpted bit by his knuckle, up to the shadow of the one on the next one. Leave a shadow, jump on top. Work up, leave a shadow, jump up on top. And what we're painting there, okay, is these on the hand. Okay? So when we paint those, we paint a highlight right up to the bottom of the shadow. Right up to there. Then we leave that shadow, jump up on top, and we paint our next color. Work our way up to there, leave a shadow, and then paint on the top. A lot of people lately, what I see people doing is they'll paint a highlight up here and a highlight in the middle of this space. But that's not where the highlight goes. See, the highlight goes all the way up to the bottom of the shadow, instead of just a dot out in the open. Okay? So that's what we're going to try to do here. And now we'll do the top of his wrist. And do the same thing on the top of the fingers. Lots of shadow still showing on that hand. Lots of cool sculpted stuff on that hand. Finger on the back. We'll paint the inside of the thumb. Now his thumb is kind of wrapped around like that on the bow. So make sure you don't just paint over that with the brown for the leather or whatever. We want to make sure we paint that thumb quite distinctly from the other finger so it's visible. These orcs are the infamous orcs of the three-finger orc tribe. So they each have only 3 fingers on each hand. Okay, so let's do the other hand now. Our light is coming this way, so we want the top of those fingers painted green. If you think of that as being a cube, then the top of the cube gets a nice strong highlight. It's going to have a little bit less light on the sides. We still want to make sure we preserve those shadows. And when we come to highlight this later, we'll focus the light towards the top of the hand. There, top of that little sculpty bit. There we go. So now we've got another hand. Now we're going to jump to, let's do this bicep in here now. So what we want to do is we're going to basically think about it as a dot in the middle of that bicep is where the main light should be. Except look where we've got our light up there. So that highlight actually needs to go right up to the bottom of that next piece of muscle. So it's not a dot. Okay, we're painting most of the bicep right up to that line. Then we're going to leave a little shadow, jump across, and we come from the other side. This is the tricep, if I remember correctly. We're going to paint most of the tricep this color, and that highlight goes all the way up, right up against that like tendon or whatever that's going on there on his arm. Could be a mold line. When we do the elbow, it's the same thing. We need a dot of color on the elbow, but then we highlight right up against the bottom of the deltoid, I think, isn't it? I could be wrong, whatever. But we want the highlight to come right up to the bottom of that muscle. And the same thing on the muscle back there. Okay. And when we continue highlighting, we're going to focus it in a line along that arm. So all the highlights are going to run parallel, facing towards our light source. Okay? Let's do his head now. So the light is there. We'll start by... you really can barely see any of his face. We'll soon fix that. So let's start by putting a dot of color right in the middle of his forehead. Now, is that dot big enough? We need to kind of work our way back from there and look for the next kind of fold of skin at the back of his neck. So don't completely cover that shadow. We want to keep that. And then highlight the top of that fold of skin on the back of his neck, but not the bottom. We'll leave that in shadow. Same thing. Highlight the top of the next fold of skin and the top of the neck that shows under the fur. There we go. Oops, sorry, I drifted on you. There we go. Now, we've got these ears, so we want to paint the top of the ear, and we'll connect that to the side of his head, because your ears are connected to the side of your head at the top. At the bottom, it's not. So we don't paint the neck right up onto the ear. We leave a shadow between the bottom of the ear and the skin of the neck. But the light's going to catch inside the ear, so we're going to highlight the bottom of the ear on the inside, but not all the way to the top. We're going to leave a shadow where the flap of ear skin would cast a shadow into his ear. Do the same thing on the other side. Paint the ridge on the top of the ear, connect that to the top of his head, but then we paint the inside of the ear and we leave a shadow against the top of the ear. And now we've got these big cheeks. So we paint the top of the cheek right up under the eye socket. And we want to connect that to the skin under his nose. And then across the bridge of his nose. He's got like a broken nose. So we'll bring the cheek light across. There's the center of the highlight on the right side. Up to the eye. Right up to the bottom of that eyelid. But then connect it across his nose. Because his nose is quite smashed in. And then we'll connect the skin under his nose to the cheek. Now, it's not sculpted that way, but if we don't do that, he's not going to look like a humanoid. He's going to look like something very strange. So connect the cheeks across like that. And then we're going to do a separate light on his chin. And we'll bring it up to underneath his lip. But don't bring that light right up over his lip. His lower lip, leave a strong shadow there. And that really just emphasizes the size of this guy's gaping, huge mouth. Try to connect it a little bit on the sides. So we're going to give him a jawline that he doesn't actually have. So bring that line right along the jaw on both sides. There we go. Now his face is a little bit more visible. The last thing we need to do is we're going to highlight. He's got some tendons and a bit of an Adam's apple in his neck. So just put a little bit of color on each of those shapes, but make sure you don't connect them to anything. We want them to be kind of separate and in the shadow, because they're not really lit by the light hitting them directly. The light's hitting the fur and then bouncing up and lighting them up just a little bit underneath. So the neck can be very, very dark, and we're going to leave that pretty dark. I like that. He's starting to look well defined now. Starting to look dark green skin orc. Now, let's do the same thing again, but we're going to do it with the rot stump green. And the rot stump green is a bit more desaturated of a green, but it's a little bit warmer. I'm not sure how it's going to look. I kind of like it though. And we're going to do the same thing again, but each of these highlights is going to be smaller. Okay. So if you want to switch to a finer brush to do like the face details, now's the time to change to that finer brush. Okay, so we're grabbing this rot stump green, or whatever this color was called. Rot stump mud is the name of the color. And we're going to do all those same colors again, and these highlights are going to cover about 80% maybe of the previous color. So we'll start with his kneecap again. Tiny little highlight of this color on the kneecap. Oh, I like that. Pointing towards the light source. Now, this is going to seem way too light. Don't panic. Just trust the process. This is going to darken as it dries. Okay? So we'll start again on this hand. We'll start with the lower part of the hand, and do not cover all the way down to the shadow. You can cover maybe 80% of it. This is 80% of the previous green color. But don't cover any of the shadows that we left. So paint up to that shadow with this highlight color, but not over it. So if we did that up to that piece, we can do the next part of his hand. There's a little ridge there. We'll paint this green on top of that ridge. And bring that green right up to the base of the shadow that we left on the next ridge. Jump the shadow. Don't completely cover the green, but cover most of that previous green. Right up to the shadow again. Jump the shadow. Jump the shark. Jump the shadow. Leave a little bit of that previous green, but then paint right up almost to the bow with that green color. Put a bit of a dot on each of the knuckles, because those round shapes are going to reflect the light. And then we want to paint the back of his hand. And leave those shadows. Don't cover over those shadows. We're going to do a glazing blend with the leaf green. And that will smooth out anything that looks a bit rough at this stage, okay? Each of the fingers, bring that green right up into the shadow. There we go. It might look a little bit cartoonish to you at this stage, because the jump in value that we just took was pretty big. And this green is a lot warmer than the leaf green was. Do the palm of his hand. Try to paint that little thumbnail separately from the rest of the thumb. That's a little detail that will stand out when after we do the glazing. And just the very top of those fingers pointing towards the light. Okay, because those are really on the shadow side. And we will darken that back down again, but we don't want to be too light at this stage. Okay, now we'll do, what was I did last time? The other hand. So we're going to do the other hand now. We'll do that the same way, but bear in mind that the light is coming this way. So it gets less light on the back of the hand than the other hand did. So we really want to focus. Remember, I said if you picture this as being a cube, the light is strongest on the top. So we'll paint the top of that, the top of his thumb, and the light is coming this way. So the front of these fingers is going to have a bigger highlight than the sides of the fingers. Bigger highlight there, smaller highlight there. And the thumbnail separately again. Okay, and that's, now I think I want to do just a little bit more color of this green color on the tops of the knuckles and the top of those fingers. Just a little bit more, not much more. There we go, that's about what I want. And back from this angle you can see that there's the light coming this way would catch the top of that thumb and the top of the wrist. So we'll highlight those with this as well. Just a bit. Now, as we go around the arm, oh, I totally forgot that arm. You're gonna have to go back and do that. Let's do that now. We need that to be dry to be able to paint it. So we're gonna, that arm that I missed, we're gonna paint that green now. It's like when you find a mold line, you just gotta remove it, right? Well, we missed that bit of skin tone. We just have to do it now. Okay, so the back of this arm, same idea as what I was talking about before. So there's the highlight in the armor. So the highlights on this bicep need to line up with that. So we paint a green highlight on the forearm and the bicep because they're kind of like mashed together in the sculpt because of the way the arm is pulled in. But the brightest part of the green lines up with the brightest part of the highlight in the armor. Then he's got this bicep muscle underneath. We'll paint that separately. And that's probably about as light as that's going to get underneath there. Now, but on the back of his arm, he's got like a big vein there. We'll paint the top of that vein. He's got that bicep muscle. We'll paint the top of that up to the... So we're going to leave a shadow at the bottom of that muscle. So we'll paint up to the edge of the shadow, but don't cover it. Same thing with this tricep. Tricep? Yeah, tricep. And then the back of his arm, painted this green, but up to, but don't cover the shadows at the bottom of those muscles. I really like Trey's sculpting. He did some really cool Vikings for his own company, Redbox Games, and I bought a bunch of them. I bought a bunch of the like Norse women and like some really cool like sages and this kind of stuff. But the way I do things here is I find all those minis that I like to paint and I just put them up for sale. And usually what happens, if somebody buys one, I just replace it and eventually I'll get to paint them. But Trey stopped producing those models and I didn't realize it and I kept selling them. So there was a couple of really cool ones. One was called Magda from Afar, and there was this elf girl that was really, really cool. And so other commission painters bought them and I shipped them off to these other studios and then realized, oh, I can't get these anymore. Which is too bad. Trey's a great sculptor, and I wish those models were still available. All right. There we go. But I know somebody got them that wanted to paint them, and I know they were all painted by professionals. So I'm sure they're beautiful. That's kind of fun when I get contacted by other commissioned painters to help them find stuff like that. All right, so the highlight in the green now is focused towards the same point as the highlight on the armor. They line up. Okay, and we're going to do the same thing on this bicep. We're going to put that dot of green in the center of the shape again, but then we're going to extend that highlight up to the bottom of the shadow, but not cover the shadow on the adjacent muscle. There we go. Like that. I do the same thing. He's got that. There's the highlight on the top of that tendon or whatever. I do the same thing on this triangular muscle. Then we put the green dot in the middle of it, but then highlight up to the edge of the adjacent shadow. There we go. Same thing down there, just a little one. So now the focus of our highlight on our arm lines up with the highlight in the armor. Okay? And now when we do the face, it's the same idea. We want that our light is this way, so we know the light for our simplified purposes is in the center of his forehead, about there. Then we'll extend that just to make sure that it's the same shape overall as the rest of his head. Okay, but now he's got those really strong brows. So we paint a separate highlight on the brow, and we take that right up to the edge of that little shadow we've just left on the edge of his eye there. Okay. Do that little bit of that on the back of his head as well, where this little bit of a highlight on the skin, those folds of skin. We do the tops of the ears on both sides. Then we go down and we do some little complex highlights on the insides of his ears, where Trey's got that really cool stuff sculpted. But don't completely cover over the shadow inside his ear. We want to keep that shadow inside the ear. Now this is where it gets a little bit complicated because he's got that huge wide mouth. So we've got the jowl starts there. So we want to highlight on the top of the jowl about there. Okay, there's the dot of it. And we're going to bring that up to below the cheekbone, but don't bring it up onto the cheekbone. And then we want to highlight the cheek separately, right up to underneath the eye. And we'll connect that light to the one that goes just below his nostril. And then separately highlight his nose. But keep the nose separate from the brow. And then highlight the top of the cheek on his right cheek, but separately from the jowl. There's the jowl on the other side. Okay, and then we're going to bring that light on the jowl. Now he's got a fang there. Don't cover the fang with this color. Leave a little bit of a shadow around the fang. Bring the light up under his nose. There we go. We've got his upper lip. Okay, so now we want to put a highlight on his lower lip, but without covering all those teeth over. There, I just accidentally did exactly what I said not to do. I painted right over that tooth. I'll fix that later. And then we're going to highlight, so there's the light in the center of his chin. And we'll just extend that a little bit left and right. We'll bring it up right to the edge of the shadow under his lip. So that his mouth is like really like big, droopy, drooly, overhanging mouth. There we go. And he's got this creepy fat jowl, and he's got a tendon on his neck. Paint those a little bit of a highlight as well. I'm pretty happy with that. The only thing I'm not happy with on that is the highlight on his head. I don't feel like that's big enough. So I'm going to extend that a little bit further back. But don't cover over any of the, like, don't completely cover the previous shadow green layer. We need to leave some of that still showing. There we go. That's kind of what I want. All right, looking good. Now we can see what our orc looks like. Now, that is not our highest highlight. We need to go higher than that. So what we're going to do is grab some more rot stump mud. And there's our big dollop of golden blonde. Let's put just a little bit of golden blonde in there at a time. See how much it changes the color. Didn't change it very much, just add a little bit more. Now that made quite a difference. We just need to, we don't want to jump from like our mid-tone to our highest highlight. We need like one more step before our highest highlight. So we just add enough golden blonde into that green so that the yellow makes it warmer and the white filler and the golden blonde lightens the paint, makes the value higher, so it's a little bit lighter. And now you'll see when we put this on, it should be visible, it should be quite visible as a highlight. Now, we don't need to do this on his kneecap again. We want to really focus our light in the center. So I want to focus on the top of the back of his hand. So I'm going to redo some of those highlights, but don't completely cover over any of the shadows we've already done. So we, in a sense, you can think of as that light green that we just did, the rot stump mud, is the shadow of this color. So don't cover the rot stump mud completely with this color anywhere. So that's about all we need to do on that hand. And I'm just going to wait for it to dry here and see if it really does make enough of a difference. And I feel like it doesn't. So we're going to go one step lighter. Let's add another dollop of golden blonde in there. Clean our brush out and reload. Now let's do those little highlights again. Yeah, that's a little bit better. Just a little bit lighter. Okay, so now we'll do the bicep on that side in here. Remember, we have our center of our highlight. And we'll extend it right up to the edge of that shadow. There we go. Same thing with that tendon and with the muscle from the other side. There's the center of our light. And we just bring it right up to the edge of the shadow cast by the adjacent muscles. So now the center of our highlight is lined up with the center of the highlight that we did with our chainmail. See how it all lines up there? We do the same thing on the other hand. Remember, this is now where we want that light on the top of the square, of the cube. Okay. And a little bit on the fingers at the front, really focusing, drawing out the shapes of those knuckles. And then we get to the forearm in there. We want these to all line up. So it'd be like the thumb, the center of that bicep, and the center of the highlight on that chainmail all should line up. Okay. Let's just check to see if we need to bring anything up on the back. Probably could, but yeah. I'm going to grab a little bit of rot stump mud again. Just bring up the back of these muscles just a little bit. Why am I doing that? Because when we glaze these with the leaf green, they're going to get pushed way down, and I feel like they're not light enough to survive that. They'll disappear under that color. Let's bring them up a little bit more. There we go. Now here's where things are going to get really cool. We can take that lighter mix with the golden blonde and the rot stump mud, and we're going to highlight the face. And again, if you want to switch to a smaller brush, this is the moment to go to the smallest brush you've got available. But this brush is doing good work for me, so I'm just going to keep going with it. Now, we don't want too much paint on the brush, so load it up, and I'm just going to dab off the excess on my paper towel. And now I'm looking for this. There's my light, so the center of that light is going to be the center of his nose. Okay, but not pushing past the shadow we made under his brow. So there's the center of his nose. There's the front of his brow. And there's his other brow. I think he's got a scar on that side. And then there's the center of his forehead. So that's the center of the light on his forehead. So we pull the light in by bringing our brush strokes from the outside into the center, but without covering over the shadows that we carefully built earlier. So we want to keep that sort of cragginess going that that was sculpted, but that we also exaggerated as we built him up. Okay, so there's the front of his face, and then we want the top of those ears, almost like an edge highlight towards the front. You don't really have to do the inside of the ear at this stage. We're really focused on the strongest highlight. So now, if you look below his eye, we've got like his eye, and then at the bottom edge of his eye, the eyelid is visible. We want to put a highlight from the corner of his eye across the top of his cheek, but don't connect it to the nose. And we want this to be below that eyelid. And he's got a very craggy face, so that can go down a little bit, like that, like a little T shape. There's our T shape. We want the same thing underneath the eye on the other side, a little bit of a T shape. And then the top of that lip under the nose. Corner of the jowl on both sides. Corner of his mouth. And then the lip. This is the lower lip that I'm highlighting. And he's got a scar on his chin. He's got, and there's his very beat up looking chin. There's our goblin. Now, the question you got to ask yourself, is that light enough? The answer, of course, is always going to be no. So we're going to make one more mixture by adding another big dollop of golden blonde into that skin tone mix. And now we're just going to do a few little dots of highlight to really bring the light centered on his face. So we want to do the center of his nose, a little knot in the center of his brow, the edge of the scar in the center of his brow, the crooked part of the bit over his right eye, tip of the ear on both sides, and my brush strokes are going to go along the ear out to the tip on each ear. Accentuate the ears. And then just the top of the cheek. I'm not making a T shape this time. Just underneath that really dark eyelid. I want to bring up that a little bit. And then let's do the upper corners of his mouth, the center of his lower lip, and just a touch in the center of his chin. Now he's looking pretty badass. And I want one final light at the center of the highlight on that bicep. Dig it. I like it. How do we paint the eyes on this guy? Well, those are tiny, tiny, tiny little eyes. I gotta say, like, they're sculpted so small that is very, very challenging to paint. So that's why I have on standby my super, super tiny 00 Kolinsky Sable, what is this company? Rosemary & Co. Super fine point brush. And I'm going to put a little bit of, I guess I'll use the 50% snow shadow and 50% pure white is going to be the color that I'm going to use. And I'm doing a two-step eye. The two-step eye meaning step 1, fill the eye socket with dark color. Look, it's already done. Step 2, I'm going to paint the whites of the eyes. So I'm just going to put like a little tiny dab of color in the corner of each eye to have it look like he's looking in that direction. So it means that if he's looking that way, the white goes in the opposite corner. I don't want to paint that dark eyelid. I want to leave that dark. So I want this white dot above that, the farthest back corner of the eye socket. Now, these eyes are tough to paint. I have no doubt about it, okay? They're very, very small eyes. So if you try it, doesn't work, and you want to either just refill the eye socket with dark color and walk away or whatever, that's totally fine. It's these are very, very small eyes. Do the other eye socket. Get him looking in the direction that he's shooting. Okay, so we've got a little bit. I think I've kind of screwed that up a little bit. So how do we fix it? I grab some black paint and I just paint over that eye. That eye I liked. It's the other one that I didn't get right. And then we let that dry and we try it again. You see, he felt a little bit cross-eyed to me. That's better. I'm happier with that. Now he looks like he's looking in the same direction, basically, with both eyes. Kind of off to his left. That makes me happy. So now we need to paint his teeth. Let's do a mix of wolf gray and mostly creamy ivory. That'll be like the base color of his teeth. And then we'll highlight the teeth golden blonde, and they'll look like gross yellow teeth. So just pick you don't have to paint all of the teeth, just pick out a few to kind of So he's got that toothy grin on the go. There's his teeth. And now we can maybe paint just a little bit of the golden blonde as a highlight on one of the teeth. So he's got like one yellow tooth. Let's do that. That one right there is gonna be he's gonna have one yellow tooth. My guy's got one yellow tooth. You guys can do whatever you like, but my guy's got one yellow tooth. Pretty happy with that. Okay. Now it's time for black wash. All right. We're going to do a black wash now over the fur and over all the armor. Now we want to be really careful. Okay, I'm taking this dragon black. I'm putting maybe 3 or 4 times as much water into it as there is paint, so it's going to be really thin. Okay, that's it there. And I'm going to just paint it lightly over the armor. I don't want to get this over this. I really don't want this on the skin tone is the main thing. Okay, so I'm going to start by his knee down here, and I'm going to go with a slow brush stroke across those shapes, and the paint is going to fill in. The textured chainmail that's been sculpted. Okay, so go slowly across. And now the texture of the chainmail gets filled in with the black paint. And what I'm doing is I'm moving across as I'm pushing the little blob of paint ahead of the brush so that it ends up pushed into a shadow. Okay, so if you're not familiar with this technique, this is how it looks. This is the surface that I'm working on. I've got my wash, okay? And what I'm doing is I'm pushing this wash across. So it's filling in the texture. But I don't just let it sit in there. I push it across into the corner. And kind of park it there in the corner. And the place where I'm choosing to park it is where I want the shadow to be darkest. Okay, so like up underneath the little sword or into one of the folds on the back, somewhere like that where I want the paint to be pretty dark. Okay, so just a little bit of that on the brush at a time. That's what we're working with. And the aim is to fill in the texture on the chainmail. And then we're going to do the same thing on the fur. But we do the chainmail separately first, being careful the whole way through not to get it on any skin. What happens if you do get it on the skin? What will happen is as it dries, you end up with this line. You see that line there? It's called a tide mark or a coffee stain. And it happens very quickly. You can, if I lift that paint back off now with the brush, I get left with quite a stain. Okay, so you end up with these kinds of marks on the skin tone, and they're quite gross. We don't want that. But when you do this on the texture, it's basically invisible. So the dark paint fills into the fur, fills into the chainmail, but it doesn't. Those tide marks are much less visible. So when we, particularly, so example on the bicep here, we want to do this only on the chainmail, and I'll pull the dark paint down along the body. Remember, we had a little bit of green under his arm there. We'll push that into the shadow down there, and I'll do the same thing coming from the other side on the front. Pull it along like that. Pull it down into the shadow, and park it under there. I'm going to do the same thing under his other arm. Top of the other arm. And this is why I was concerned that our highlights might not be bright enough. They might get darkened down by this black wash. Okay, and it's a wash as opposed to a glaze because I'm letting the paint kind of go wherever it wants to go into the texture. If we were glazing, we'd be a lot more controlled about that, as we are going to be when we glaze the skin here in a moment. Okay, so there's my chainmail texture brought back. I'm going to do the same thing again with the same color, the same black, but we're doing that over the fur now. Okay, so we'll do fur down here on the boots. Let that black fill in the texture. A bit more on the other boot. We want to be really careful now. We're going to do that on this bracer here. We want to fill this in over the fur on that bracer. And there's a lot of skin near there, so just go slowly and carefully. Cover that over. Front and back. Don't cover the skin, just over the fur. There we go. And then we got the fur here in the center of his body. We'll cover that over. And then the fur on his torso. I'm running out of black. There we go. Make some more. Wow, my stomach is really growly. There we go. And do that on the back as well. It's funny, as I hear my stomach growling, I can see the mic on the dashboard here is picking it up. So I don't know if you guys can hear that, but certainly the mic might be in the videos. The microphone is picking up my stomach growling. There we go. Okay, so there's our armor and our fur. And now we need to let the fur dry. We still have to glaze, okay, over the skin. But here's what happens. If we try to glaze the skin right now, where we still have, so I'll make a green glaze, okay, and we still have that black glaze. If we try to glaze the green, okay, so there's our black glaze, which is drying. If we try to glaze green at the same time, right next to it, okay, that's not a problem. But if we accidentally connect the two, okay, you get a really strong bleed effect. And what would happen is the black will bleed up over the green skin and make it look really, really gross and dirty. So we don't want to do that. We want to wait till the black dries before doing our green glaze on the skin tone. And we need to wait for the skin to be really dry before we glaze it with the green. Because the partly dried acrylic, if you put water over top of it, it's just going to reactivate it all. It's going to make it all lift up and turn into big chunks. So, which is not probably obvious to the eye, but when you take a photo, you'll be able to see all this like crater marks. And that's the effect of that water lifting up and flipping over the paint. So we want to wait for that to dry. And in the meantime, we'll keep playing with the leather. It's the plan anyway. Okay, and we also have to figure out a plan for the bone on that bow. Okay, so we've got brown leather boots. We've got rugged, rusty leather skirt. Let's do the same leather, which is underneath there as the belt. So this is going to be ruddy leather. is going to be the color for his belt. Okay, so here we go. We're going to... Now you might get black bleeding into this color if you touch this where the wash is not dry. That does not matter very much for this color. That's not a big deal. So we're not too worried about that. Just try to be careful not to touch the black as you're painting this reddish leather color onto the main belt. This is on the big belt. And we want to keep the scabbard and the sheath for the bow a different color. It's a little bit of this reddish leather shows above the belt pouch by the quiver. There it is. And this is kind of our armor color. So let's paint the big leather chunk on his armband this color as well. Just go slow and carefully. We don't want to mix this with the... We don't want to get this on the skin tone if we can avoid it. Yeah, I like that. That's going to look alright. Okay, now we still need to do that strap, this quiver, or this scabbard, that quiver, and that belt pouch. So let's use the russet brown, so the same color as his boots, or whatever it does. You can use whatever leather colors you want. Just try to have a slight variety in them. We're going to use this on these leather quivers and the leather scabbard. So we'll paint this on the quiver on his back, and that means it's also going to be the color of the strap that goes over his shoulder. Belt on the front. Okay, what do I need? I need one more leather color. No, I need two more leather colors. So this color is going to be on this scabbard as well. Here's a little dagger, short sword, whatever. And then I guess those are supposed to be fur. I don't know what that's supposed to be. I don't know. But think about that for a minute. So we need one more leathery color. Let's use... Yeah, well, let's use leather brown. this color is going to go for the belt pouch. We're also going to use this on the hilt of the sword and on the handle of the bow, the grip of the bow. Okay. My black wash is pretty much looking dry there now. So it is time to do our first layer of wolf skin, of wolf fur. So I'm going to go back to that wolf gray. And I had made a very dark mix of it. So I'm going to add some more wolf gray into that to make a slightly lighter mix. And this will be my first layer of wolf fur. So this is my mix of black and brown, probably 1 part black and brown and 4 or 5 parts wolf gray. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run the brush lightly along the fur texture, just kind of like this. This kind of scoop in and run the edge of the brush along those textures. And I'm going to start from the top and I'm going to work my way down. And that should catch the edge of the textures the same way as you see it catching the ridges on my thumbnail there. Okay? So we'll do that now. You don't need much paint on the brush. We'll do this little bit on the front of his leg first. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of catch the edges of it and work my way down. Now the point of doing all of that dark wash, I'm working on his right leg now, was to darken the shadows of the fur. So we don't want to just aggressively push this paint down into the low spots of the fur. We want to leave those dark colored. They're just catching the raised bits back here as well. You can also, if you've got a very fine pointed brush, you can just paint fur texture with short, thin brush strokes over top of the fur. And then you'll end up with a texture that's painted that works alongside the texture that's sculpted. And the two of them, they don't have to line up with each other, but they will each make the other look furrier. Hope that makes sense. But they will work together. Okay, so we've got this little bit of fur under his arm. I'll do it with the thin lines. Tiny lines of fur. So instead of trying to paint the texture, I'm painting fur as though I was just working on a bare canvas. It's not a bare canvas though, it already has a fur texture on it. So the two of them work together really well. But for a lot of people, when you're starting out, painting hundreds and hundreds of tiny little parallel thin lines to make a fur texture can feel really time consuming and not very worthwhile. So don't do it if you don't feel like it. Instead, we'll just try to catch the raised edges of the texture with this color. And this is our first highlight color. So this is actually the shadow color of the wolf gray that we're going to put on next. So as you're doing this, just bear in mind that you do want to focus where these lines are a little bit more towards the light direction from here. But it doesn't have to be perfect yet. But that's just something to keep in mind, that that's where our light is going to be. As I said before, you could dry brush this, but I feel like dry brushing it will tend to be very messy at this stage. So it might be better just to learn to either paint the surfaces of the texture that's sculpted, or learn to paint millions of little lines to be the fur texture. Both are useful skills, whatever makes you feel happier today. As you can see, it doesn't take very long. Just keep plowing away through it. Now, if you're feeling really ambitious, you could look at photos of wolf furs or of wolves and try to make a pattern on this fur vest that he's wearing to make it look a bit more like a wolf skin. But I'm not planning to do that today. Just want him to look like he's furry. Okay, there we go. Now, I'm going to get my wolf gray, and I'm going to do the same thing again. But I'm going to focus in zones that are closer towards my light source. So there's my gray. Okay, and so instead of just doing it everywhere, if this is my wolf fur texture and the light's coming this way, I'll do the same thing again, but concentrate the brush strokes so that they're closer in. They're more densely packed, pointing towards where my light source is. So from this area down here, our light's coming that way, so I'll do more of them on the upper part of that fur and on the side of that boot closer to where the light is. We'll just do a few hundred little quick brush strokes facing towards the light. Down here, not much light is going to catch that this way. It's going to get a little bit on the top of the boot back here. We can do lots of little brush strokes. To give the impression of a highlight here on the top of the boot. Like that. Okay. And then for the under his arm here, really only going to catch close to the front, so we'll put all of our little brush strokes towards the front. There we go. And on the back, same thing. It's only going to catch right up here. A little bit there. And a little bit there. That's about it. We want to do the back of this boot down here. You see the light coming this way. Might just catch a little bit at the top. Okay, and that's enough for there. From this direction, yeah, we could probably put a little, just a little bit down here where this fur sort of bulges outwards a bit. Now, if you're doing airbrush shading, you would highlight, like, really make sure the fur texture is really fully detailed on the back here, because you're gonna make it less visible when you come back in and add your shadow colors through your airbrush. So you want that texture to be really, really strongly visible back here, but we're not going to do that. So this is our final kind of coat of paint, so we're not so worried about that. We'll just put a few little lines back here so it doesn't look quite so strongly lit. But once we get to the top of the shoulder, the light's going to get up there quite a lot. So we really want to do a lot. Really make that light colored. The smaller you can make these brush strokes, small and short, the more like fur this is going to look. Okay, and if you're doing the highlighting method, where you're just dabbing the color on the texture, you put more dabs in the zones where the light is going to hit more, which really is predominantly on the top of the shoulder. And with the light coming this way, it's going to be all along here, and on the top of this shoulder is going to be the lightest part of the model. Little fur textures. Keep going. Concentrate this again towards the light as much as possible. This is not the final highlight though. There's going to be I haven't decided if it's one or two more colors on top of this as yet. Probably there's at least one more, if not two. Now if you just dry brush this, it tends to make it look a little bit more powdery. Whereas what I'm doing right now is painting individual strands of hair, not the strands of hair that are sculpted, but I'm just painting strands of hair from the fur as though there was no texture there. I'm doing that to build up the impression of light in a light direction towards the light source by highlighting the fur with this concentrations of strands of fur. I'm pretty happy with that. It's starting to look like a very furry warrior. So now we need to go one level higher. I'm going to take creamy ivory, mix it into the wolf gray, which I think is that color that was there anyway. did that on the, what did I do that on? Oh, that was for the teeth. Okay. And now I'm going to keep going with my little fur texture. But now this much lighter fur texture, lighter color, really needs to be focused only on areas where the shape of the fur would catch the light. Okay, so the light would be caught, for example, right on the top corner of this, bit on his bracer. So I'm not painting it everywhere, just where the light would really be caught and the shininess of the fur is going to be reflecting the light. If the fur is a little bit oily, it's going to have a little bit of a sheen to it, almost like, not quite like polished metal, but the positioning of that's going to be the same as our highlights on our NMM, which you'll notice are much less visible now as we're highlighting up the fur around it. What we don't want to do is make this brighter than the skin. It can be lighter than, like you can have a light area in the fur, but we don't want it to be to become suddenly like the main focal point. We want to keep the face as the main focal point. We'll just keep doing this fur texture. If you want to see a really good fur texture, check out Bryce Kokenor's entry from ReaperCon this year. Won second place, I think, for the Moonlight Minis competition, and he painted the monk hairfolk, and it's really cool. She's like dropping a rose, like she's doing a mic drop. But if you look really closely at the photo of it is on the ReaperCon 2023 entries. Just like do like a find in page and search for Bryce, BRICE, and you'll find Bryce's stuff. And the rabbit, this hairfolk creature, the fur texture is a really good example of how that texture is supposed to look. It's really worth checking out. Okay, so we're building up the highlight by just putting thousands of little fur texture lines on top of the fur that's already there. I know I've said that like 9 times, but I'm just reminding myself what the heck it is I'm doing so I don't, get distracted and forget or whatever. Again, we don't want that everywhere. Just so if you look at like the fur there versus there, this is highlighted, this is not, but it still has fur texture. There's our highlight in the fur in the shadow. Okay, so we've got an indication of our light direction in everything that we've painted so far, except for, well, okay, that's not true. That was a total lie. Just noticed I forgot to paint the handle of that sword. Let's do that. Okay, so now it's time to do the glazing of the green. Okay, glazing the skin. So our mid-tone on the skin is the leaf green. And you'll notice, say if you look at the bicep, that the amount that's covered by that green is very, very small. There's just a very thin amount of it showing there in a lot of spaces. So we're going to bring back that green by glazing it back in. And this is going to be a blending glaze. So we're going to try to make this green smooth out the layering in the green that we've already got on there. So in this case, for my glaze, I'm going to go about 2 parts water to 1 part paint. So it's thinner, but it's not as thin as the black was. Okay, so I'll do a bit on my finger, give you a sense of what it looks like. Okay, and what we're going to do do it on the hand first. Now this color already exists in here. Okay? So when I do my layer of green, and I put the layer on, just like I did with the black, it's going to leave those blobs of paint. Okay, so here's my, I bring the brush along and it leaves these blobs. Okay, so the idea is to park those blobs on top of something which is already painted that green color. And that way when they dry, these lines disappear against that green background. Okay, so we don't want to have a lot of paint on the brush, but what we want to do is bring the green across everything. So I'm going to start on this hand. I'll start up by the corner of his wrist. Okay, there's a little bit of green added on. And I'm going to slowly pull that green down across the whole hand, letting it cover everything. But because the paint is semi-transparent, all the shadows and things are going to show through that. But I'm pulling that green down, and those little blobs that I just mentioned, I'm parking them down here at the bottom of his hand, right in there. They're parked right there. So that as they dry, the skin is going to darken, the color is going to turn more green, okay, but the highlights are still visible through. You can still see the highlights. So compare this area to that area. That looks kind of yellow, this definitely looks green, but it has definite highlights and shadows. So that's what we're going to do everywhere else now. We're going to add some of this mid-tone leaf green over everything. And then pull those blobs down to park them on top of the areas which already contain that color. And that's going to, as it dries and darkens, it's going to make everything slightly darker and also smooth out. You think about it as like if you've got a pile of steps, like a staircase, okay, and each of those steps is a color that goes from dark at the bottom to light at the top. And if we take sand and pour sand over that whole staircase, it basically fills in every step, and it makes every step closer to the color of the sand. And that's essentially what we're doing here with this green. We're making everything, the green is our sand, and we're pouring it over everything to make everything closer to this color. But the shadows and the highlights, the edges of the stairs, the shadows in the stairs are still going to show through that sand because the sand is semi-transparent. Okay? Do that on the back of the arms. Do it on the back of the other hand. Now this green can be a bit strong, right? So you might find that the best way to do it is to make your glaze a little bit thin, and if it doesn't have enough effect, you can always go and do it again, just in case you end up making it too strong. And you lose some of your highlighting. That's what we're looking for. Okay, it still looks very highlighted, but just not quite as bright as it used to. To do this on his kneecap down there. Okay, now doing it on the face is a little bit more of a challenge. We want to be a little bit more careful. And what I like to do is kind of start at the back of the head and pull it down across the face and pull it right down and park it down here in the neck. Okay, you'll park it down in the neck there. Don't want this to go into the eyes. So we go near the eyes, but then pull the paint down. We don't want it in the teeth. Pull it down across his face. And we're pulling it down towards the bottom so that the more the paint, because this paint is darker than our highlight color. So if we end up with too much, the spot that gets too much will be at the bottom. Now I got some on the fur. I'm just going to take a moment and clean that up. I don't really want to park green paint on the fur if we can avoid it. Do that across the back of his head as well. Pull the paint downwards. mark it on his neck. Because he is, you know, green-skinned orc. Or maybe he's a really burly goblin. There we go. So we still have all of our shading and highlighting visible, but he's definitely green colored now. Alright, so what else do we need to paint on this guy before we're done? We've been painting for well over 2 hours now. Let's focus. So let's do two things. First, let's paint the bow, because I said I was going to do that, and then we'll paint some textures on the leather. So for the bow, I'm going to start out with, you know what, I'm going to start out with leather brown. Going to give the bow a base coat of leather brown. I know that's the color I already used to make the grip, but I'm going to be totally changing the color of this here in a moment. So I'm just going to grab leather brown. It doesn't have to be leather brown. It can basically be any sort of light brownish off-white color. But horn is kind of tends to be a mixture of like a yellowy white and sometimes there's little hints of blue in it, but it's mostly like black and off-white yellowish, almost ivory colored kind of streaks. And so this is going to be sort of a good base color for that. Okay, so there's our leather brown on the, and then what we're going to do is we're going to take the golden blonde and we'll make a mix of that 50-50 with the leather brown. And we're going to highlight those pieces of the bow. And the tips of the horns are going to end up being darker, right? So I really want to focus his color more closer up to the towards the leather handle. And do that on the other bit as well. I'm really mostly focused on the side towards the light, not so much on the back of this. Okay, we're going to need to give that a moment or two to dry. Okay, it's already a different color than the grip. We really need to let that dry. So while I wait for that to dry, I'm going to let's do the ruddy leather. So we take our ruddy leather color, and we need to basically add a highlight color over that. So let's try, we're going to use, I don't know, how about polished, no, polished leather is not good for that. We want really an orangey color. Tarnished copper? That could work. I'm going to grab tarnished copper. And there it is. It's kind of an orangey brown color. Is it very much different from Harvest Brown? It's just a, I don't know, maybe a desaturated version of Harvest Brown. So what I'm going to do with this color is, so now we've, the same way as we were highlighting the NMM on the metal, the leather's a little bit shiny. So where there's an outwards rounded surface, it's going to get a highlight because it's kind of shine, reflecting light from there. But the belt itself is like a, it's kind of shaped like that, like it's got a curve at the top from the pressure that it's under. So we're going to highlight the top edge, and this part where the belt is kind of, where it's pulled tight, it gets a curve on the bottom. And we're going to use this color to highlight. Now we're not going to put just a straight smooth highlight. What I want to do is sort of highlight the upper edge of it. So like there's the upper edge of the leather belt. But the bottom of the belt, say here's our belt. This is our belt. Okay. The lower part of the belt, I want to the highlight is it's going to be like a cup that catches light. So I'm going to make like a texture with this color on the lower half where it catches the light. So we're going to end up with a shadow at the top, light at the bottom, and an edge highlight on our leather belt. That's going to look fairly natural. Now, these first texture lines don't have to be really tiny and perfect. In fact, the way the light's reflecting is giving you a sense of that already. You can see that effect on this belt and on this one just from the way the light's catching it. So we're going to start by putting those little dots of this color along the top edge of the belt, and we're basically making like an outline of the shape with this color to start with. We've got those two little strings. We're going to highlight those. And then let's do the other side, go along, define that one. A little line along the bottom. Okay, but now we want to start putting all these lines on the bottom half of this belt where the light is going to catch. I'm not just making a smooth base coat, because that's not what leather looks like. Knit leather has a grain to it. And essentially what we're doing is putting a whole lot of little parallel lines. And we're putting an increased concentration of lines towards our light direction, because that's where our highlight are. So the more of these little leather line marks close to where our light is going to be. There we go. That's our start point for highlighting. And now we'll do the same thing on the back. Now on the back it's not catching the light directly, so it doesn't need to be quite as pronounced, but we're essentially doing the same thing. Now as you're putting your little dots and dashes on, you just be careful not to get this onto the fur if you can, because the fur is basically finished at this point. There we go. A little bit more of that belt under the arm, right in there. Okay, and we're going to do that anywhere that this leather color is on the model. So there's the pants, not the pants, but it's like his little battle skirt. So these shapes are round and kind of stands outward, so we highlight the center of the round shape. Because that's what's going to catch the light. Same thing back here. And on the front. Light coming this way, so these flat surfaces facing the light a little bit more of this color. And we got the bracer up here on his arm, so we'll do that as well. So we paint the edge, like the outline of it. And then because our light is this way, we focus a whole bunch of these little highlight lines to line up the highlight on his hand, through his arm, through the chainmail, through there, up to his head. So this is like, oh, don't want that orange on his head, like a line of highlight. So we want the bracer to be highlighted, the highlight to be focused in the same position, because that's how light works. It makes your brain interprets it as being natural when it's done that way. Okay. Now, is that enough? No, we need to go lighter than that. Nope, forgot that bracer back there. We'll do that one as well at the same time. There we go. And now that the bow is dry, we're going to take, we're going to use that weird skin tone color I made, which I know sounds kind of weird. I'm going to put a touch of blue in it as well. So this is our bone shade, bone shadow color. And what we're going to do with that is we are going to start about, so here's our bone. Okay, and we're going to start about a third away from the end, and we're going to put this color on, and we're going to pull it away from the handle outwards towards the tip like that. We're going to put a coat of paint like that, and it's going to darken the tip of that. And we're going to do the same thing. It doesn't have to be identical, but the same sort of proportions of color, but a third of the remaining length of it out at the end. So the tip of the bone is now darker. Okay, and we're going to give that a moment to dry. Right on. While that's drying, let's do the next color on our leather belts. So we're going to take that, whatever that color was, tarnished copper color, and I'm going to mix leather brown into it. A little bit of amber gold or whatever. It's basically making a lighter version of that same color. And this is the color that's going to be like all the scratches and damage in that leather belt and on those leather bracers and things. Okay, so what we do is go back to our leather belt for a minute, and we're going to basically do like little cuts and scratches all along the edge of the belt where the light catches. And then if our light direction, don't forget, is say there, we're going to do scratches and dots all along this edge, but we're going to concentrate them more towards the bottom. As we get closer to our light source, we're going to do more and more and more of them. So it's the same thing we did with the fur. We're building up a highlight in our leather texture towards the light source. Okay, and some of these can go quite a bit further up. So intermittent down here, but almost continuous as we get closer to the light source. And that gives us a highlight, a sense of like the highlight direction. So let's look back at our belt again. This is our light. So our highlight is going to be brightest about there on this belt. Okay? So now we go and we start making little dots and dash, and doing this with the finest point is good, but really it's mostly about how much pressure you want to put. So if you put just a little tiny bit of pressure, you're going to get very, very small dots and marks, and that's what we're looking for here. And you can see I can do this with a fairly large brush, but the key is this is a good quality brush so that when I vary the pressure, it varies the amount of paint that comes off the brush. And that works best, I think, with the sable brushes. I find it's a lot more difficult to control that with a synthetic brush. But, you know, everybody has their own sort of preference for this sort of thing. You also don't want a lot of paint on the brush. A lot of paint can make this You really don't want to be getting a flood at this stage. So just a little bit of paint on there. And again, more little marks and scratches and dots and things closer to where we want that light focal point to be. Don't completely neglect the shadow side. But really want to focus them closer into the center of our light source, I mean. Okay, so there's our leather belt coming along quite nicely. Same thing down here. We want to kind of put little jagged marks, define the edge of our leather skirt here. So the smaller you can make the dots and dashes, the more you can control exactly where they land, the more you can sort of control where the apparent light is on the model. And then once you've got control of the light on the model, you can really do something exciting, and make things look really interesting. So that's why I'm showing you how to do this. Even if you're just a beginner, it's a good idea to be thinking about, what's my focal point? Where is the light? What direction is the light coming from? How can I make things more dramatic by how I affect the light? And then we get our cool looking model. And the funny thing about textures, when you first start doing textures, it feels like they take forever. But the more of them you do, it really does not take very long to get a good feel to how to make the dots and the dashes build up into the appearance of a particular material. And that's what we're really trying to do, make it look like a particular type of material. Have that illusion. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. Now, what I do want to do is bring back a little bit of my shadow in that leather. But before I do that, I'm going to do the next phase on the bow. Go back to my glaze color that I made a minute ago. This gross brown color. And now this time I'm going to do the same glaze again, but I'm going to start closer to the handle. Start closer to the handle here. So I'll start about halfway. But I'm going to pull the paint away from the handle again. Keep my brush strokes going away. And you can do this with tiny little lines if you want, or you can just do it all in one color. But go right back out to the end of the bow. And what that's going to do is it's going to darken the end here more than the middle. And the net result is going to be something that looks quite organic. Which is what we want our bone laminate looking bow to look like. I love this figure. If I ever played a half-orc fighter again, this would be the figure I would use for it. I'd get the metal one and put a lot of time into painting them up. There we go. So there's our bone bow coming along. But now, polished bone, laminate bone, is a shiny surface. So what we need to do is bring back in quite a light highlight on that. So we are going to take creamy ivory or some similar color. We're going to put a little bit of pure white into it to make it even lighter. And this is going to be the reflection on the bow, reflecting the sunlight. So it's not going to have much of it down here. The main color, the highlight is going to start about there, and it's going to run. So it's like we're highlighting a metal cylinder. So it runs from that corner in a parallel line back up to the handle. And this is the shiny reflection of the light off of the polished bone. And it doesn't go everywhere, it's just on the bone. Okay, and we're going to get the same thing up here. Really important that these be sort of parallel to show that they're reflecting the same light source. And then we get there's our polished bone bow. Okay. And then last thing I'm going to do today, we're going to put that shadow back in on the belt. And on the belt we had been using this ruddy brown color, or ruddy leather color. So I'm going to use burnt umber, I think, which is a very, very dark chestnut brown. Raw umber might be better, but don't see it on the table. Oh my god, too weak to open that. Burnt umber, burnt umber. There we go, that was easier to open. Put a little drop of that on the palette. And what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to take that ink and I'm going to put it on our leather belt here, and I'm going to push it to the top of the belt. So I'm going to put it on there and I'm going to push it, same as I was doing with those other colors, right? I'm going to push it up like that. Push it up, 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 push it up. Start low, but push it up. And you see how those marks all show through? But then the top got really, really dark. Okay, that's what I want on my leather belt. So because the edges get frayed, and that natural light brown color is what tanned skin looks like when it's damaged. And that shininess is what the effect of like leather being rubbed again and again and again. And we get that shadow color. And this particular color of ink looks really, really good on leather. So that's what we're going to do. We'll do that on the belt first. I need to add a little bit of water into that before I do this. Like a little bit. We don't use the ink straight. We'll thin it a bit, and then we're going to push it up on that belt. So we'll push it up from the bottom to the top of the belt. So we'll start down here in the shadow. I'm going to push it up, 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 like that. Okay, and we'll let that dry. You see the difference between the two sides of the belt. That looks like leather. That's not quite there yet on the other side. Okay, so, and this is going to stay a little bit shiny like that. And we'll do that on the other side as well. Push from the bottom to the top. Okay. If you find that you've made it too dark, or you covered over your scritches and your marks at the top, you can always go back and put a few more back in. On the skirt at the bottom, it's a little different because of the direction of the light. The light is coming this way, so we want to push it away from the main light direction into shadow. So on this side, I'll push it down into the shadow. Oh, that was a little bit of a flood. Let's lift that back out. Okay, I'll rub that off with my finger a little bit. So this is our main highlight right there. And then we'll push it down away from that towards the shadow. But we'll leave that uncovered, and then we'll push it off of that back into this shadow, and then we'll leave this highlight and we'll push it to the back of that leg like that. And then we end up with that leathery looking skirt as a result. As I said before, if you feel like that's not dark enough, you can do it again. Or if you feel like it's too dark, you can come back in and redo some of your damage. For the bracer on the top, okay, up here, we can start there and push it off to the sides so that the highlight will be at the top on the center. Do the same thing on the back. Pull that off to the edges. But do the texture first, and then do this kind of glazing into extra color, a little bit of shininess. But do the textures first. So there's our fancy leather belt. And our bone bow. And our green skin. And our wolf gray fur. Okay, and then there's all those other leather details to do, but you guys can do those on your own time. All right, so that's our orc for the day. See if I can get a good, clear, final shot of him. There he is. Okay, so that's your orc, and what's the next class? Is going to be, Tess Iron Faith. We're going to do the Adventuring Cleric next. So next week we'll do Tess Iron Faith. That'll be fun. And so that's it for me for today. And all the folks that have painted all the way along through, I appreciate you being here. It's great to have you, and we'll see you for the next time.